All right, so the second part of the assignment is to consider the concept that I am hoping you will investigate, which is the issues that occur when politics are involved in medicine. So, I know that right now we can very actively look at what's going on around us as an example of the dangers that can occur when politics are involved in medicine. But usually, when I assign this project to students, I usually speak about HIV and AIDS. This has two reasons behind it. The first is that it is such a clear case of the dangers that can occur when politics attempts to derail medicine. And the other reason is because AIDS is still very much something which is a real issue, but yet we no longer really talk about HIV/AIDS education. And I really think that that's a big mistake for the country to really overlook the impact that HIV still has on a number of communities, in particular, the African American Black community is deeply impacted by HIV/AIDS. Um, in some ways, more and more so with each year. Okay, everybody. So the second part of the assignment that I'm going to cover here is the conceptual nature of the project. So we've already discussed the visual um, sort of requirements in terms of like the exploration of constructivist style posters to create a social political work. And so now we're going to talk about the concept behind the work. So the the goal of the assignment is not necessarily to create an HIV/AIDS awareness poster. That's definitely one route you can go, but it's not the goal of the assignment. The assignment's goal is to examine the dangers of the politicization of medicine. So like what happens when politics are part of medicine? It's impossible, of course, in many ways to separate politics from medicine. As a trans woman, I know this. I also know this as someone who was married to somebody who was a breast cancer survivor. There's a lot of politics in medicine that shows its face in many different parts of our healthcare system. Um, and I think breast cancer is a great example here to sort of discuss. When I grew up, breast cancer wasn't discussed in the media. It wasn't something that you saw information about in newspapers, and you definitely did not see car dealerships proclaiming that portions of their sales went to breast cancer. As a movement of information, as a movement of activism, the breast cancer survivors and now doctors and organizations, um, they really had to take on not just the disease, but also the social stigma of talking about breasts um, on the news, in newspapers. And that was something which had a deep impact on the silence surrounding breast cancer. So of course we've come so much further today, and now we're starting to talk about other types of things like prostate cancer, and the reality is that the social censorship around disease is very, very dangerous, and it is often also interlocked with the political censorship around disease. We see that right now, definitely with COVID, you know, and one of the reasons that I have kept this assignment focused on HIV and AIDS is because I feel very, very deeply that we no longer talk about HIV and AIDS the way that we need to. AIDS is still on the rise. More people are getting HIV, AIDS every day. It is a global issue and it deeply affects marginalized communities. So, one of the documentaries I provided for you to watch is called Endgame, and it is a documentary about AIDS in the Black community and the political history that has helped to really ensure that there is an epidemic of HIV/AIDS in the Black community in America. And we see it. There's a really large impact of HIV/AIDS in the trans community that I'm part of, and we live in a time when you can easily access PrEP, which you can take every day, and that will lower your chances of contracting HIV substantially. But yet we don't really talk about how to get access to PrEP, and we don't really talk about what PrEP is. And so this is all sort of a mixture of political pressure, social pressure, and it has very deep impact. And so I want to talk about politics and medicine. I want to talk about the power of visual imagery, and I also want to talk to you about this. Take this opportunity to talk to you about HIV/AIDS because I think it's not spoken about enough. So what we see here is a poster from the designer Guy Fieri. He was an AIDS activist in New York City, and he was part of a collective called ACT UP. And this is a very famous poster that they made. We have the pink triangle, a black background, and then just the words silence equals death. What is so perhaps difficult to understand when looking at something like this is the deep resentment that individuals in America, particularly during the 80s, had towards the gay community. Um, and I know that like we can kind of contextualize it based on some of our experiences that we've seen politically just over the past 5 years or so. But you're talking about a highly accepted negative view on the LGBT community um, from both left and right. And when we look at the slogan silence equals death, we're not just seeing the idea that like if the at this time, the largest impacted group of individuals were gay men, we're not just thinking about the idea that the silence of the outside world is going to equal the death of the gay men within the community who are getting HIV and AIDS, or HIV that transitions to AIDS. What we're also thinking about here is the number of closeted gay people in powerful situations, in powerful places in society, who, because of social stigma, because of political pressure, had to remain silent as well. And so there's a really large context to this idea of silence equals death. And ultimately, what activists really saw and what they were really aware of was that, um, this was an epidemic that was powerfully impacting the gay community, which was a marginalized community. And the way that politics was really interplay here was about the allocation of money to help prevent people from getting HIV, to study HIV, to find a vaccine for HIV, and how that money was not forthcoming. You had the HIV task force at the CDC literally using outdated equipment because they couldn't get funding because this was seen as a disease that was only affecting gay people. Now, we know today that we have cases of individuals dying of AIDS going back to the 50s that were not members of the gay community. But what the world at this time saw was what was originally called gay cancer. And so the impact is seen to be specifically only towards gay men and as a marginalized community, as a community that was easy to ridicule, as a community that lacked political and social capital. It was a community that people really don't want to pay attention to. And people in the media, people, um, celebrities were very quick to make fun of the AIDS crisis because it was targeting or seemingly targeting only gay men. On the left here, you see a picture of the AIDS quilt or the AIDS memorial quilt. Um, it is the largest piece of folk art in the world. It's made up of 54 tons of fabric, and you can see it laid out here on the mall at the Capitol. Each panel is the size of a grave, and this was originally conceived by Cleve Jones, and he sort of came up with the idea when walking in um, a, a march to honor victims of AIDS, this first march in San Francisco, and the names of people had been written on bed sheets and they were hanging, I believe is the story. And he looked at them and he thought, wow, they look like the size of graves and it looks like a quilt. And so he kind of conceived this idea of this quilt um, with each panel dedicated to someone who had died of AIDS. And so this is still something which is ongoing, and you can actually request blocks of the quilt to be shared, at your institution or something of that nature. Um, just recently in downtown Seattle, there was actually a restaurant that was displaying some of the blocks. And so it's not, from my understanding, it hasn't been put together in totality since the time that it was displayed on the National Mall. But it's just an ongoing, large scale project. So we don't really, the next bit is kind of like some history for you. We still don't really know where HIV came from. The most sort of common belief that every time I talk about this, I always go and check to see has anything changed. But the most common thing that seems to be believed is the relationship between eating bushmeat in Africa, in particular those of monkeys, and a monkey having what is called SIV or simian immunodeficiency virus, and that being transferred to a human perhaps through, a cut in the mouth comes in contact with blood or something of that nature. And so, when I was younger, definitely one of the things, and this is triggering, but it's very true, one of the things that I grew up hearing was that this was the result of people actually having sex with monkeys and chimpanzees. And that is completely false. That is not true at all. But it plays into the role that, uh, this sort of social and political barriers that were established from the very beginning of this disease impacting the gay community. These rumors were meant to dehumanize individuals and to automatically create the sort of feeling that these are people who are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and it's their fault that they have contracted this virus, and um, obviously that theory was built on ideas of um, the goal of dehumanizing individuals, and this is different from this sort of theory that seems to be the most generally believed theory, which is that humans who would come in contact with bushmeat uh, created the situation for this virus to spread from chimpanzees or other types of monkeys to humans. We share 99.5, I believe, percent of the DNA with chimpanzees. So it wouldn't be a very difficult um, jump for the virus to make. So this information, again, continue with some information that might be triggering as you read the packet. And what we do know, what we can really think about here with the politicization of medicine is, what does it mean when individuals who have a disease, who are um, dying from a disease, are prohibited access to their loved ones, not because the disease may be contracted, but simply because they are seen as not having the right or the privilege to see their loved one as they pass. So here we do see a family grieving over an individual who is passing with AIDS. But it definitely was the case at this time that um, many individuals would go to the hospital to share the last moments of life with their partner, and they were simply denied access because they were gay. And that is a very horrific reality that many people faced. Many people died alone because their partners weren't allowed to have access to them because they were gay. And so, again, the impact of politics, the impact of the social stigma surrounding a certain group of individuals. Again, this isn't because the disease was seen as something that could be contracted through visitation. This was seen because it just seemed that the social feeling was that a gay partner was not worthy of the right to see their partner passing. This was such a prevalent and common feeling that even celebrities such as Sebastian Bach um, would openly and spitefully attack the gay community. And so, again, triggering information, but this is a very famous photograph of Sebastian Bach, and you can see the T-shirt that he's wearing is dehumanizing the gay individuals, the gay men who are dying of HIV. Now, let's not also forget that at this time that heterosexual individuals were also dying of AIDS, particularly in the hemophilic community, but also drug users and other individuals of lower economic status were dying from HIV and AIDS. And it was a scary time. That's completely true. I lived through this period and it was scary. But the way that that fear was actually flamed rather than um, sort of, looked at from a point of view of how do we actually de escalate fear is very much was very much part of that fear. You had people on radio shows making fun of people with AIDS. You had people on the news not speaking about the deaths of gay people with compassion. Um, so even though there's like this like logical concept we can make to COVID, because only one group of people seemingly were impacted by this disease, it was okay to um, make fun of the fact that they were dying, and honestly, for the government to restrict funding for care. And, um, you know, it was devastating and very, very sad. Bruce Monroe is a friend of mine who has HIV, and this is some of his work. Unfortunately, after a number of decades fighting HIV, Bruce now is sadly not able to make art anymore, and so I wanted to um, represent his work here. So his work has a very sort of highly technical, um, highly detail orientated approach to it. And we can see something like on the right here, a silkscreen construction sculpture that mimics the shape um, of the HIV virus. And on the left, this is some of the imagery he creates around like his body and the virus in his body. So artists have been looking at this and doing this type of work for a number of decades now. And so we're going to add to that discussion. So please go through, read all of the information, watch the documentaries. It's really important that you watch the documentaries and kind of expand your knowledge of HIV and AIDS. And then the goal of the assignment to develop and produce a constructivist style poster that addresses issues surrounding contemporary AIDS education, awareness, patients' rights, or you can also choose to talk about the depoliticization of medicine. You cannot use negative language or feature discriminatory, derogatory languages or images. All poster designs should be approved by me. They should be discussed with me during your one-on-one meeting, your ideas. Okay. So you have to include the following. It has to have some type of digital or photographic collage element, but that amount cannot be more than 25%. And you can only use red, white, black, or white materials. Okay. You can't include color photographic imagery because the constructivists didn't have color photographs, but you could do a collage from a magazine, you could do a photograph you take, you could do digital transfers, you could do something in Sketchbook or Photoshop. You have Photoshop. So you're required to incorporate constructivist design. You are required to incorporate text. I don't mind what language the text is in, just make sure that it says what you say it says. You're required to speak to the project's intent, so the intent that's outlined in the goal. You're required to make 75% of the work by hand. You're required to create a poster that's no smaller than 8 by 11, but you can be as large as you like. And you're required to only use red, white, and black. So if we jump to the assignment online, then as we scroll to the bottom down here, you can see the two documentaries I want you to watch. I really highly, highly suggest that you watch these documentaries, in particular Endgame. It's a very important documentary. And then these are some student examples from last quarter. So you can see the way that the photographic element is being used, like here, and then all this text is hand cut, the symbols are hand cut. I'd like you to pay attention when you're doing the text to try to make it look really clean and high quality. This is a really nice example here. This one being about the extra taxes that are on feminine hygiene products. This one is about, not playing God if you're a doctor. And this one is about HIV prevention. So some nice examples there for you. When you come to your meeting with me, then bring along sketches. I would do the thumbnail process, 10, 5, 2. So 10 small ones, 5 medium ones, to half-page ones. Come up with as much of a clear idea as you can and bring that to the discussion. Um, and at that time, you can ask me any questions you have about the assignment. I would definitely start working now on your idea and creating like a good sense of where you want to take the project.